Greetings, productive programmer. So in our last lesson, we left off where we can now leave comments on stories. But when we leave the comments, they're obviously not displaying yet. We will get to that. But when we leave the comments, we can see that in our database, they're being saved without the story ID. So they are being saved, but they're not being displayed yet. And they're being saved without the story IDs. So we need to make that relationship work again. So going back to those database principles that we worked on last time where we associated a user with a story, now we need to associate our comments with stories. So what we can do, the first thing we need to do is actually pass that information to our form component. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back here to where our form component is. And just like what we're going to do is we're going to have a story ID. And that we can grab that story ID just from the story directly. So story ID, we're going to pass the ID to it. And then in our form component, we need to have that as a field. So what we can do is we can set it up to be a story ID. And then this can be type hidden. And since it's going to be hidden, we won't really need a label per se. And so now we have a hidden field which stores the story ID. And if in order for that to function though, we're going to need to make sure, let's take a look, is that set up in our change set already? Let's go to where we have our blog, comments, and comment, and we do have the story ID. And we want to make sure that our story ID is going to be required here on our change set. So I'm just going to add that to our change set. And then we're going to validate that it's required. And the other thing that we can do while we're here inside the comment change set, just like we did where we associated the user with a story, we can associate the story, the comment can basically belong to a story. So we can do belongs to, and it's going to belong to a story, and that's going to be our blog. This is going to be stories, story. So now our comments officially belong to a story. So when we save this, we should be able to see that the story ID is saved now. So let's go ahead and let's see if that's functioning. All right, so I'm going to open up our terminal here, and we're going to see that currently there are no comments that have a ID associated with them. And if I come in here and I leave a new comment, does this have the user, or the story ID? Let's hit save, and it says it can't be blank. The story ID is not being passed. I bet you we just did name something incorrectly. All right, so story ID, and it's hidden, and we are not, yeah. So it's a good thing that it's actually required because we want the value, we need to pass it as a default value. So we need to grab our story ID. So we pass that as story underscore ID. So we need to actually set that up as a value. It's a hidden value. So let's see. Let's test that again. So now let's see. There it is. So it wasn't set as a value. So make sure that you, inside your form component, you set it up so that it's story ID and it's type hidden. And we need to initialize that value. So yeah, so once we pass the value in there, so we're passing from this LiveView component where we show our blog story, we then pass in the story ID as story underscore ID to our form component, and our form component puts that in as a hidden field. And when that is submitted, it goes through all of the default saving code that was created for us by the LiveView generator. So we don't have to do much here. It's already basically created for us. Again, that's why I really like to mention that the form component is one of the essential pieces that the LiveView generators create. And then that will pass it through, it'll go to create comment, which ends up calling the change set, which all we did inside of our comment is make sure that our change set includes the story ID. So we're going to have all of our comments associated with a story. Okay, so now this is functioning the way that we want it to. And we also have set it up so that comments belong to a story. And the only thing we have to do now is get this to display out onto our page so that when somebody leaves a comment, we can read other people's comments as well. So congratulations, you now have comments saving with the story ID stored inside of them. So you have a lot of functionality built out in this application. We can go to the home page, we can read users' stories, we can leave comments, we can go to our own stories, we can make a new story, and we can edit stories. We can do a test here, and we can also delete stories. So let's go ahead and delete a story, and then that story is now officially deleted. So you have a lot of functionality at your disposal. So let me see. So I'm logged in as test. So let me just do I am test user. And let me save this. And the one that says I am test user, let's go over to that story here. And let's go ahead and leave a comment. And let's just make sure that this comment can now be deleted. So if I come over here and I say I'm a test user, I try to delete that, and it has a comment on it. So it actually throws an error and it won't let me delete it. So this is actually a really good lesson that you should be aware of when you set up relationships with any type of database in general. But with our application for Phoenix LiveView, we can't currently delete stories that have comments on them. And if we look at the errors that our terminal gives us, it says that the schema constraints has an error. It says the change set has not defined any constraint. So what this means is we basically need to define some sort of resolution. So if we have a story such as the one where I am a test user and a user has left a comment on that, our application basically doesn't know. If I tried to delete this story, what does it do with all of the comments? It doesn't know what to do with them. If we delete story 30, this comment will be laying around and it will still be associated with the story 30. So what we need to do is we need to complete the relationship between our comments and our stories. So right now we've told our application that the comments belong to stories. And if we go to our stories, we have not said that the stories have comments on them. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to say that the stories has many comments. Whoops. Comments. And we're going to say that those are related to the comment struct. And then we will make an alias for that. So we'll say alias. We'll do blog comments comment. And so our comments relate to the comment struct. And now this is the part that we need to talk about. We need to make sure that when we delete a story, so right now we are trying to delete this story. And when we delete this story, on deletion of this story, we will delete all of the comments. Okay. So what you can see now here in our database, I can currently query this comment and it's saying that's associated user to story 30. So what's going to happen when I delete this story, it'll also delete this comment. So story 30 will be deleted, and so will comment 18, where we said leave a comment and it's associated with the story ID 30. All right, so let's delete that, hit OK. It seems to have functioned at this point. It's not refreshing the page and throwing an error like before. Let's go back to our database and let's select all of our comments, and now you can see it's gone. So this is a very important lesson to be aware of, because whenever you have a relationship such as we do in this case, where the comments belong to, so where we have comments that belongs to the story and a story that can have many comments, we need to also define in the relationship what happens when something gets deleted. So if we have a foreign key relationship, which just means that some of our data is related to each other, so comments and stories are related to each other, we need to set up rules so that in the case where we allow the deletion of stories, we need to handle the resolution on all the other data that is associated with the story. So in this case, our comments are associated with stories. So in the case where we delete a story, we will go ahead and we will delete all of the comments. All right, so that's really good to know. And that will also save you in the case where you find that you can't delete something and your terminal is throwing one of those errors like ours was that was saying that there's a constraint error. So just remember that you need to handle those relationships. So our comments belong to the story and our story has many comments. And on deletion of the story, we are going to delete all of the comments. All right, so congratulations. This was a lot in this lesson actually in terms of how data is related. So this is why I originally set it up so that our users would have a name first, so that way it displays their name, because that was a very simplified version of what we did here with our comments. Now we have a more complicated use case where we can leave comments on stories, and those stories, when they're deleted, they'll go ahead and they'll delete all of the comments, and our comments now will be associated with a story when they get saved. So there's a lot of information happening here. And now in the next lesson, we are going to make our comments display here. And you'll see that the comments are a little bit more complex than the users' names that we created before. You'll see that when we try to display our comments here on this page, that there's a few other tips and tricks that we need to do to get them to display nicely in the way that we want them to. All right, so that's it for this lesson. In our next lesson, again, we will make our comments display here, because right now, every time we save them, it looks like we get no feedback here visually other than this, that it was saved successfully. But we want to be able to read other people's comments, and when we save them, they'll display in real time here. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.